This submitted material is a satirical allegory detailing the events leading up to and following a group of farm animals overthrowing their human owner, only to find their new utopian society slowly corrupted by a rising dictatorial pig leadership. So, getting right into the feedback, the narrative pacing regarding the animal's acceptance of the pig's elevated status moves somewhat abruptly between the early harvest and the abolition of Sunday meetings.
Yeah, it really does move fast right there.
Right? I mean, in those early chapters, like right after the rebellion, we see characters like Clover the mare and Boxer the cart horse operating as these highly active, super engaged participants in this new society.
Absolutely. They're totally bought in.
Exactly. They are absorbing the tenets of animalism. They're singing Beasts of England with this genuine revolutionary fervor. And the text highlights all these lively communal debates. But then, and this is where it feels a bit jarring, the narrative just leaps from the subtle, secret confiscation of the milk and apples in Chapter 3 right into the general farm animals entirely accepting Napoleon's violent, militarized coup with his trained dogs in Chapter 5.
Right. It's like a jump cut.
Yeah. They transition into passive observers almost instantly, which slightly undermines the tragic weight of their eventual subjugation, you know?
I totally agree. The progression from heated debate to just, well, total silence, it feels like it misses a crucial beat of natural resistance.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you look at the mechanics of subjugation in a narrative, forcing a population from a state of vocal communal engagement straight into unquestioning silence, like the very moment the vanguard bares its teeth, it skips a vital psychological step for the reader.
Sure, though shock is a natural reaction to sudden violence, right?
Oh, for sure, and the dogs are genuinely terrifying. But the absolute silence of the lower animals doesn't feel painstakingly earned quite yet. It just feels, driven by the necessity of moving the plot forward to the next historical allegory.
Like checking a box?
Exactly.
Rather than evolving organically from the character dynamics that the author established in those first 3 chapters. Well, I want to introduce the boiling frog analogy here to look at how the narrative handles temperature. Because the overarching theme relies on a population being slowly manipulated until they don't even realize they're boiling alive, right?
Right, that's the core tragedy.
But it feels like the text is turning up the heat too quickly right at this specific juncture. It's moving from room temperature to a rolling boil in a single scene. But let me push back on adding early resistance from the animals for a second.
Okay, play devil's advocate.
If we layer in friction too early, do we risk ruining the specific historical point the author seems to be making? I mean, the working class's incredibly swift, almost naive trust in their revolutionary leadership might be the exact historical flaw the author wants to highlight to seal their fate.
That's a really fair point. Naive trust is definitely the foundation of the tragedy. But narrative tension on the page still requires friction, you know?
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, if the animals simply fold the very first time the vanguard shows its teeth, the reader is deprived of witnessing the specific, insidious methods of psychological manipulation that make authoritarianism actually function.
Oh, I see, because it's not just about the physical dogs.
Exactly. Totalitarian control isn't merely about the physical threat of violence. It relies heavily on the deliberate erosion of objective truth. So, the suggestion to fix this pacing issue is to introduce a more gradual friction, or maybe just a few minor, unsuccessful instances of dissent from the lower animals prior to Snowball's dramatic expulsion.
So they push back just a little bit.
Just a little. This will make their eventual silence feel painstakingly earned, rather than just forced by the plot outline.
Right, the illusion of equality must be tested and fail systematically before the dogs are ever unleashed. We need to see the exact rhetorical mechanisms the pigs use to extinguish the animals' voices, setting an intellectual precedent before the physical violence takes over.
Yes, let's look at some concrete examples of how to execute this on the page. You could show a brief, early debate where a maternal, highly observant character like Clover questions Squealer's logic about the pigs strictly needing the apples for their health.
Oh, because they're the brain workers, quote unquote.
Right, exactly. She could tentatively point out that the recent harvest required intense physical strength from the horses and cows, not just administrative brain work from the pigs.
I love that.
And rather than the pigs shutting her down with a threat of violence right away, Boxer ultimately shuts the conversation down himself with his personal motto, "I will work harder."
Wow, yeah. Using Boxer's earnest dedication as a weapon against Clover's intuition is a brutal narrative choice. It really demonstrates the working class policing themselves out of sheer loyalty. The reader literally watches the animals build their own cage.
Exactly, it's heartbreaking.
We could take that same concept and apply it to a slightly larger group to escalate the temperature of the water, too. Like have the hens or the cows attempt a very minor localized protest about the missing milk.
Oh, like they refused to leave the barn one morning for milking?
Yeah, exactly. But instead of a harsh physical crackdown, the protest is peacefully but entirely manipulatively dispersed by Snowball's sheer eloquence. He could paint this vivid, horrifying picture of Jones returning if the pigs fail in their administrative duties, completely talking in circles around the hens until they are dizzy, confused, and ultimately apologize for delaying the work.
That is perfect. That scenario sets a vital precedent for how dissent is handled intellectually in this new society. The reader watches the rhetorical trap being built, tested, and succeeding.
Right.
So by the time Napoleon finally resorts to sheer violence with the dogs to expel Snowball, the lower animals have already been trained to doubt their own instincts. They've learned to prioritize the pig's administrative needs over their own physical reality.
And you know that rhetorical trap, that constant looming threat of Jones returning, relies entirely on an external factor to justify their internal control. Which actually leads us right into our next point, examining how the text handles the human characters outside the gates.
Let's get into it.
The external human threat posed by Pilkington and Frederick lacks a continuous, active presence between the Battle of the Cowshed and the winter starvation. Because after Mr. Jones and his men are physically defeated and chased off in Chapter 4, they essentially vanish into the background of the story.
Yeah, they're just gone.
They exist only as rumors or, these static, frightened neighbors who occasionally complain in the tap room of the Red Lion. And because the humans are sidelined as mere observers while the internal farm drama unfolds, the external pressure on the farm severely deflates.
It really does. Squealer's fear-mongering about Jones returning starts to feel completely unmoored from the immediate plot reality.
Exactly.
I mean, the threat exists vividly in Squealer's speeches, obviously, but not in the physical world of the narrative. Totalitarian regimes require a visible, tangible enemy to justify their domestic abuses.
Right, you need a boogeyman.
Exactly. When the reader hasn't seen Jones, Pilkington, or Frederick take any meaningful action since that autumn battle, Squealer's ultimate trump card in every single debate kind of loses its narrative tension. It just becomes an empty political talking point for the reader. The reader knows the humans aren't currently attacking, which makes the animal's submission to this fear feel slightly gullible rather than deeply tragic.
Okay, but again, I have to play devil's advocate regarding the narrative focus of this allegory. The core tragedy of the submitted piece is the internal corruption of the pigs, right? The psychological decay of the revolution itself.
Absolutely.
So if the author spends too much time making the humans a proactive, highly visible threat, do they risk distracting the reader? Like the piece might devolve into a standard war novel, focused on border skirmishes, pulling focus from the true horror, which is that the pigs are slowly turning into the very humans they just overthrew.
That is a very real risk, and the narrative absolutely must avoid becoming a standard war novel. The focus has to remain internal.
Right.
However, the suggestion here is to maintain just a low-level, visible human threat, or maybe an espionage element throughout the winter, just to actively justify the intense paranoia the pigs are using to consolidate their power.
So no big battles.
Right. We do not need constant border skirmishes. We just need the shadow of the humans present enough so the reader understands why the animals are so eager to accept Napoleon's draconian measures. The fear has to feel grounded in physical reality, not just political speeches.
Okay, I see what you mean. To materialize that threat without pulling focus from the internal politics, we can utilize the environment and the fringes of the property.
Exactly.
For a concrete example, we could have the animals discover physical evidence of human sabotage near the hedges during those brutal winter months.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, they might find a deliberately broken fence line leading into the wheat field, or a small cache of poisoned grain hidden near the drinking pool, alongside unfamiliar boot prints frozen in the mud. It doesn't require a full-scale invasion, but finding physical evidence makes the threat of Jones's return feel like a visceral, immediate danger.
That works perfectly. Or another option including a brief scene where the newly introduced Mr. Whymper is seen quietly conspiring or observing the farm from the boundaries before his official arrangement with Napoleon. That would accomplish the exact same goal.
Oh, creeping around the edges?
Yeah. Imagine Clover or Muriel spotting Whymper taking notes by the hedgerow in the dead of winter, long before Napoleon formally declares they will engage in human trade. It hints at economic exploitation silently closing in on them, just sort of probing their defenses for a weakness.
I really like that. It transforms the humans from a defeated memory into a proactive, calculating force. And when Squealer leverages the threat of Jones to win an argument about cutting rations, the reader feels a genuine shiver of validation for that paranoia.
Exactly.
The submission of the animals becomes a rational survival tactic based on physical evidence, which makes the pig's exploitation of that survival instinct far more sinister.
It really does.
And, the animals' drive to defend their borders and achieve total economic independence is what ultimately motivates the construction of the windmill, which dominates the next major phase of the narrative structure.
Yes, and that brings us to our third point. The highly detailed logistical explanations of the windmill's construction occasionally stall the narrative momentum of the unfolding political thriller.
They really bog it down.
Right. In Chapter 6, the material shifts into this incredible, grueling descriptive language about the animals dragging massive boulders up the slope of the quarry.
It's very vivid.
It is, but the text spends significant time outlining the mechanics of levers, the use of ropes, the physics of gravity, and the sheer physical exertion required to topple stones over the edge to shatter them below. This deep dive into physical mechanics shifts the text temporarily from a sharp psychological allegory into a somewhat dry procedural manual.
Yeah. This mechanical focus slows down the overarching tension right at the critical moment when Napoleon's dictatorship and his highly controversial decision to engage in trade and move into the farmhouse is really taking root.
Mm-hmm.
The reader is watching a tense political dynamic reach a boiling point. But then the text suddenly halts to explain the exact physics of a limestone quarry. The narrative currently treats the physical labor in the quarry and the political corruption in the farmhouses as completely separate sequential events.
Like one after the other.
Right. First, we spend paragraphs learning how the stones are broken, and then, in a separate structural beat later in the chapter, we learn about the pigs secretly altering the rules.
I view this structural dip like a heist movie where the meticulous planning phase accidentally bogs down the action. The director stops a tense psychological scene to explain the exact metallurgical composition of the bank vault.
That's a great comparison.
Pepa, let me ask you this. Are these grueling physical details of the labor strictly necessary to ground the reality of the animal's suffering? Because Boxer's physical straining feels like the vital heartbeat of the farm's exploitation. Streamlining the logistics too much might strip away the emotional weight of what the working class is actively enduring.
Oh, the physical labor is absolutely essential. There's no doubt about that. But isolating it from the political action is the structural flaw here.
Gotcha.
The suggestion is to intertwine the grueling physical labor of the windmill directly with the psychological manipulation and the altering of the Seven Commandments, rather than treating the labor and the political corruption as separate sequential events in the chapter. Merge the physical suffering with the mental subjugation, so they amplify each other simultaneously on the page.
I see. Injecting the political thriller directly into the logistical procedural.
Exactly.
Let's look at some concrete examples of how to execute that visually within a single scene. We can contrast the physical breaking of the stones directly with the breaking of the animal's collective memory.
Oh, I like where this is going.
Yeah, we show Muriel the goat, who can read somewhat better than the dogs, struggling to recall the original phrasing of the fourth commandment in her mind. She's grappling with the cognitive dissonance of the pigs moving into the farmhouse. And right at the exact moment she begins to genuinely doubt her own memory, a massive stone shatters in the quarry below.
That is such a powerful image. The deafening crack of the stone visually and auditorily links their physical exhaustion to the fracturing of their mental subjugation. The sheer volume of the labor distracts them and breaks down their cognitive defenses, so they just can't fight the gaslighting anymore.
Right.
Another concrete way to achieve this juxtaposition is through Boxer's physical efforts. While Boxer is straining to his absolute limit, his hoofs clawing at the frozen ground, pulling a massive boulder up the hill inch by inch, Squealer could be standing comfortably at the very top of the quarry, literally reciting the newly altered rule about sleeping in beds with sheets down to the exhausted animals.
Oh, wow, the pig's luxurious new comforts being announced directly over the sound of the animals tearing their own muscles apart creates a profoundly enraging image for the reader.
It really does.
Exactly.
It ties the whole theme together perfectly.
Well, to summarize our structural critique today, first, we explored improving the pacing of the animal's subjugation by layering in gradual, unsuccessful descent prior to Snowball's expulsion, making their eventual silence feel painstakingly earned. Second, we addressed maintaining a low-level visible human threat or espionage element on the fringes of the farm to actively justify the intense paranoia the pigs use to consolidate power. And finally, we looked at visually intertwining the meticulous physical labor of the windmill directly with the psychological manipulation of the changing commandments, rather than treating them as separate sequential events.
We invite the listener to implement these high-level structural tweaks into the manuscript and submit the revised work back to the show for another critique. Best of luck in your revisions.